Have you seen The Witcher yet?
I've still only seen the first episode.
Oh, I've seen the whole thing, so I'll spoil it right now for you. Hello and welcome to the Drunk Duck QUACKCAST. I'm Ozone Ocean. With me is Baines. Hi, Baines.
Hello.
This week we're talking about our top fives for doing comic pages or, comic art and just top fives tips, top five tips for doing things. And yeah, we've both come up with a top five. I did mine in a news post the other day and I'll elaborate on it in this QUACKCAST. And Baines, your tips are new.
They are fresh.
Never been seen before. Never.
Piping hot.
Alright, beer piping. So before we get into that, we have to do our feature for this week. So I'll introduce that. My feature for the week was The Watch Dogs. So I'm going to tell you about The Watch Dogs now. Hello, I'm Ozone Ocean, and my feature for the week was Watch Dogs. Briscoe and Rudy are two specialized vigilantes that work together as a team. They work together using their complementary skills and talents to foil criminals. Their abilities are tested right away in the very first chapter when their harmless trip to the museum is rudely interrupted by a gang of particularly nasty villains bent on terrorizing the patrons and performing a spot of artifact thievery. This is an action superhero comic of a sort, with fantastic fights and crime solving. The story clips along at a very good pace, introducing the characters and the scenario right off the bat. The art style is anthro, stylized, with a cool, gritty texture underlying all the images. All full-color digital work. The artist has done a great job to make the work as presentable as possible. It's good-looking work. The art is consistent and clear and interesting. So you should read Watch Dogs. This is a comic by Fernie Perdomo, and it is rated E for everyone. So this is a good comic for all ages to read, which is always very nice. Okay, so check it out, Watch Dogs. And that was our feature, The Watch Dogs. Right, next up we have the featured music. Gumwalt has given us a theme, again, as he always does. Fantastic themes. This week the theme is to Molly Lusk, which was a comic I featured last year. Very recently last year. So, dark shades of grey, shadows in the night, penumbra, tenebrae, and twilight. We move in the not quite night, keeping our actions secret and behind closed doors. No one must know. The dual life and secretive nature of Molly Lusk is well summed up with this creepy noir tune of whispers and shadows. So, take it away, Gumwallace, with the theme to Molly Lusk. And that was the theme to Molly Lusk. It's a comic by Andreas Helix Finger, and it's rated M. Alrighty, so the QUACKCAST top 5 tips. Top 5. So, should we
With a bullet.
Hey?
Sorry, go ahead.
The bulletin?
With a bullet, I said.
Oh, with a
Top 5 with a bullet.
So, do you think we should read like one top 5 and then the other top 5, or just mix them up?
Whatever you think.
Probably make more sense if we do it like for art and then we do it for the page.
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Top 5.
Then I have one for writing. So we could do the writing first and then our art top 5s, or the other way around. As you wish.
Well, everyone's seen my top 5 tips. Well, everyone, I mean the people who read Friday's news post where this comes from. So let's do yours first.
Okay. And are we going to go through yours as well?
Yeah,
again?
We'll do them. Yeah.
Okay, so mine, yours were great art tips. This is more narrow focus for mine. Drawing a comic page. That's what you said, right? We'll do this comic page one?
Yeah.
Okay,
excellent.
Drawing a comics page. So, number 1, I thought the most important thing was... why am I talking this way? Have the order of panels and dialogue / events be as clear as possible. So your readers can see, the order of things, the order they're supposed to read the panels in, and also they'll understand what's going on in the actions, in the dialogue on the page. So that's number 1. Very, again, like I said on Patreon, very obvious, but essential,
Yeah.
There was a period in I think the late 90s or early 90s or something in comics, in superhero comics, where the layouts were getting crazy. They were really strange. You'd have to turn your comic book to the side sometimes to read the splash page. There'd be a double page spread with like one giant character in the middle jumping, and then like all these scattered panels all around it, and it was like really hard to read. And I was just like, I don't get it. So I'm quitting comics as a reader.
The Image Comics influence from Liebfield and his band of young upstarts, exciting comic artists.
Yeah. I mean, not that you have to be completely rigid and unimaginative with your panel layouts, of course, but more important than being clever with your layouts would be clarity of what's happening. Because what's the point of a story if your reader can't tell what's going on?
Yeah. There's a
digestible.
toss-up between those two things. So clarity and making it an exciting enough experience, because you can emphasize action and the passage of time through panel layouts, but you can easily get carried away with that and make it not readable. So you have to be so careful. Yeah, you could either go very simple like Tintin, where with all the panels are the same size, traditional Tintin, and gridded out, but that can become very boring for a reader and not very compelling.
You might want to break it up, because you don't want the reader to get tired on that level because of it. Always a layout. Yeah, it's true.
But it's a very hard thing to do, and so that's a very good tip to make interesting but informative panel layouts. It's what comics are built on. A comic page, that is your skeleton. And that's the fundamental, and it's surprisingly difficult to do. It is,
For sure.
So it's
definitely something I struggle with is what's the character doing, because I'm not a very good artist. So I've sometimes tried to tell a story more visually, even if there's dialogue, they're talking about something else, but the character is doing something important, and several times it hasn't been clear. I can tell by the comments. Like, oh, okay, I didn't do that well enough. Like, people don't know what's going on.
What I do is, I still struggle with this. It's like forgetting that, okay, people read right to left. So you have to have the action actually flowing. a way that facilitates this, because you can't have, if you want this character speaking first, then if you put them on the wrong side, then you have to cross over speech bubbles in some way, or have one above it. Like you are immediately messing yourself up doing that if you put people.
I do it all the time. Like the characters are always standing in the wrong place from the previous page. Yeah. Like why are you? How can you be standing on the wrong side every time?
That's so simple, but it's so important.
Yeah,
and that's so a big part of the page layouts. So.
Yeah, like who's talking? Yeah, that's part of it too. Exactly. Okay. And it not looking weird with crisscrossed dialogue stem things.
Yes, I do that all the time. It's just why don't I just bite the bullet and just bloody redraw it? I do not know.
I mean, sometimes you can't though. Like, I mean, you could, but you don't want your camera. This is getting into other topics, I guess. But you don't want your camera flipping all over the place. At least I don't like that, like it's a filmmaking rule too. Like you don't want your camera flipping all over when characters aren't moving around or you're not starting a new scene. It's like from the previous page, they're still in the same place. So you don't want to keep changing your angle or it's confusing. Like where's everyone standing and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
There's ways around that in a comic, of course. You can separate panels. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. You got to be smarter about it. That's all.
Yeah, it needs some thought. That's all.
That's why
my number 2. Sorry, go ahead.
That's why layouts are important. Okay.
Yes. Number 2, I said keep your words as economical as you can, and still tell the story, obviously. But overwriting is one of my biggest pet peeves as a reader. I get tired very quickly. Maybe more quickly than most. If I see too many words on a page, I'm like, oh, I can't read this comic. This is too much. Finding that balance is a little tricky because I think it's kind of different for every genre. Some genres or some tones need more words and want more words for the story to work properly. Some need way less than they get. And I more often see too much words, and I'm including my own comics in this. I more often see that than too few.
Yep.
So try to say what you're trying to say, but keep it as economical as you can.
Yeah, that's so important. I've struggled with this many a time. You think you're being so clever with this genius dialogue, and then you realize, hang on, I'm just covering up everything with words when sometimes exactly. Like there's the rule is show not tell. So that's for everything, movies and all sorts of things. So the idea is to have we'll have the characters obviously doing this thing, and then I won't have to put too much in the dialogue because I'll have them have most of it on screen. But it's like some of the things you can't do that with because you're having like really clever dialogue that you think is fun with jokes or clever remarks or something. And it can be so painful, like almost physically painful to cut that down. And sometimes you just can't. You pare it to the absolute bone and there's no way else you can cut it down. Mm-hmm. So, you've just got to be really careful to do this. There is a way to simplify the text down, but sometimes you can only do it so far.
Yeah, that's true. I find like a lot of my little tics as a writer become more obvious when or if it's something we're doing together, like if you draw the page, then I see the dialogue. So I try, when I'm not sure, I try to sort of sketch it out myself if someone else is going to be drawing it, just to see, like, am I screwing up here with too much dialogue or too much back and forth? Like when I say tics as a writer, I mean like sort of someone will say, hey, Jim. Jim's like, who, me? Yes, you. Or they'll say, what? When it's not needed. Like sometimes you want that little back and forth. Yeah. I definitely do it too much as a writer. But when you do it in a comic, it's like you can really see it. Like that's an extra balloon you have to put in there. It's filling up space. And like, is this really anything? Even in prose, like a lot of time, the right thing to do is to cut that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, but, you can cut a whole bunch of stuff out. You can go, hang on, I don't actually need this whole big conversation or this like maybe this entire paragraph can be cut down to one sentence or 2 words.
Yeah. And even if that means you're not explaining everything, that's the judgment call you have to make. Like sometimes there's stuff that needs to be gotten across, but sometimes it's like, well, people will probably get this. There's probably a lot of preamble or a lot of exposition here that I don't need. Yeah. People will figure it out later in the story when they're actually interested in knowing it. Or maybe it's something people don't even need to know or don't need to have spelled out, kind of thing. Stuff like that.
That's true. One of the tips I once, I was teaching for a while digital animation a long time ago, and there were all these like creative classes in the same facility, and one of them was on script writing, and I was like overhearing what this expert on script writing was saying to people, and he was saying, look, whenever you have that in the word that in like a script in dialogue, you should think about
pointing at something, in other words, or whatever.
Yeah, that is, or something like this. You can often get rid of most of the that's, and which means like if that's part of an explanation or something like this, then just cutting out that word also cuts out that explanation. I'm saying that all the time myself. Damn it.
Interesting. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, cool.
Yeah. See, it does work that way. Yeah, that's cool. Cool, and it makes things a lot simpler. You can cut stuff down, and you can make streamlined your wording just by doing that. Because that is a word that keeps. It's like subclauses. That is that, and you keep on going down and like rambling the way we do in a QUACKCAST.
Sure. Yeah.
There's
very interesting. No, now I'm going to be overconscious of using the word that.
Yeah.
There was a Tom Hanks movie, his directorial debut, like about a band. That would ruin the title.
That thing you do. Sorry, it just came into my head. Oh, jeez. Well, that's an excellent tip.
My number 3 was vary the camera. So I was just saying before, like you don't want the camera flipping all over the place, and like 2 characters like in like shot from different angles when they're standing in the same place, because it's confusing as far as the layout of the scene. That applies to film, and I kind of try to apply it to comics. But through a page, varying the camera so it's not just talking heads, not just a mid level shot or a proscenium, like sort of a play, always the same angle, is a good idea. Your comic is great for this because you'll do these really high, wide shots, and then you'll get in close to a character and stuff like that. And it's really like visually interesting, and you have different sized panels too. That's kind of a neat thing that comics can do.
Well,
but breaking it up is a good way to help your reader's eyes not get tired, help them not get bored.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a wide shot. Sometimes you want to pull way back. Sometimes you want to focus tight in on someone's eyes, or their face.
Yeah, and it also helps that kind of stuff establish a scene. And then you take them into the scene. And that way you don't have to keep on showing detailed images of backgrounds and where people are, because you've already done it in like one panel where you've done you pull out wide shot. So yeah, there's stuff like that.
Yeah,
it helps.
Yeah, exactly. It applies to the sort of basic filmmaking structure of a scene, where you have your establishing shot, and then you move into your mids, and then move into your tighter close-ups after that.
Yeah, it's oh goodness me. I'm just messing up with my browser windows. Yeah, it's fun to do that too, because it means you're being more creative when you're thinking about it. And
right.
You get a better, as an artist, you're getting a better mental picture of the scene and where people exist in 3D space.
Right.
So yeah, that can help you better visualize what you're drawing. So yeah, it's good for a couple of reasons. So vary the camera, but don't go too crazy. I mean, like, you were talking about before with like flipping around too much. But it's also, you can exceed your skill level, which is good for challenging yourself, but it's also very bad, for making work too hard for yourself. So, and what I'm talking about there are like anime kind of thing, like a manga kind of stuff, like a ultra, like a bird's eye view of characters, or like a worm's eye view, that kind of, it's very dramatic, but it's very hard to draw and get right. So if you're going to be doing that stuff,
Well, and also if you overdo it, you won't be able to emphasize those dramatic moments you really want emphasized. So you don't want to do that every time. Just when it's right. It's kind of where the intuition comes in and the artistry comes in, I guess.
Yeah.
It's also craft, though. You can learn that kind of stuff.
True. I would follow the Sergio Leone kind of way of doing filmmaking, like, doing shots. It's where we have like wide shots and close-ups and stuff like that, but it's usually on, and, downwards, but it's usually we're not looking up at crazy angles. We're looking from the feet into the distance, but we're not looking up at the person from the feet. So that means everything is like horizontal, which means it's just, different levels that you're using, which makes it a lot easier to draw that kind of stuff. So we're at an eye line and we're looking at the person's eyes directly. We cut in for a tight shot, and then, we're like, okay, at the feet line or, somewhere else. It's still perpendicular, which means you don't have to mess around with weird perspective, actual perspective, which means like 3-point perspective, like aerial perspective, where we have stuff like, building things get smaller as they go up, that kind of stuff. You don't have to worry about weird fisheye effects or anything. It's pretty standard. It looks dramatic, but you don't have to do extra work to do it. So yeah, that's a good tip.
So it's just what is it then? You're just putting the whatever you're looking at is just higher in the frame. Oh, okay, yeah.
Exactly. So you can go down to the foot level, but we're not looking up higher. But you can still see. Okay, that character in the distance and all these buildings and stuff like that. And we are at foot level, and we see this man's foot really big, or the leg of his trousers really big, and it still has that effect of the bird's eye view without, having to look up. And it's very easy to draw.
Yeah. It's this is one of very few times I can express pride in my artwork because I'm super proud. And I didn't draw this stuff, but I did a Halloween story a couple years ago in my comic, and I knew I wanted it to be a little bit claustrophobic. I knew I wanted it to look scary, and the little bit I knew was that a lower angle is scary. Like that can give you a sense of sort of drama and sort of scariness and stuff like that. So I molded my, I modeled my video store set in 3D, so I'd be able to do it. And I just reread that story. It's from a few years ago now. And I was looking at it, and some of those pages with those low angles and those long angles look really good. Like that, I got a little scared reading my own story from back then. That really worked, man.
Well, that's a good idea. Yeah, using a 3D program will really help you be able to sort things out without killing yourself.
So I wouldn't be able to draw it very effectively with my laziness. So.
Yeah, that's a really good idea.
Speaking of laziness, my number 4, that's fun how that fit. Hiding things you can't draw is a losing strategy. Readers will notice, and you'll never improve. That could be advice to myself.
Yeah,
definitely.
That's come to me too. I mean, sometimes I go too far the other way in that I have this thing where I think, oh, I can't draw that. That's hard. So I must try. I must do everything I can to draw it.
Okay, that's what they say you're supposed to do.
But it's if you do that too much, then you're always like making a rod for your own back. You're always making everything too hard for yourself. So there's a happy balance. So if you're doing that all the time, then you're just always doing stuff that's way too hard and making everything not fun, you know?
Right.
So yeah, but it is a good idea. Like you have like the Rob Liefeld effect, which is classic.
Yeah, is he always hiding stuff like hiding feet or hiding hands in pockets or whatever he's doing? It's classic.
Yeah, exactly. And it has become a trope. So yeah, be careful, or you end up like him.
I mean, if you're drawing comics regularly, I know I've run into this. Like, it really gets in the way of trying to tell a story. Like, it's important to see the hand on the doorknob because this is a big moment.
Yes.
Like, if you can't draw hands, it's like you're tempted to hide it. It's like, no, it really does get in the way.
Yeah. Then your story is limited by your abilities, and that's not good.
Yeah, people aren't feeling what they're supposed to feel. Like, they're just not getting the impact that they need to get.
Yeah, exactly. So you got to push yourself.
Exactly. And finally, my number 5. This is more for traditional artists. Don't eat the ink off your brush. I know it's tempting, but just don't do it.
Yeah, just you end up with black teeth and poisoning and just
black tongue.
It's so hard. That's why it needs to be up there, because we all suffer from the temptation.
Exactly so. Your 5 tips are more the larger view, I think, of being an artist in general.
Yeah, these are art tips, basically. But art tips for comic pages, so not art tips for all art. Mainly focusing on doing comic art. And this is stuff that's based on my experience of, drawing comic art, but also reading many, 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 many webcomics and seeing the pitfalls and seeing what works best with them. So, my first tip, of course, the number one is practice. Practice makes perfect, as they say, and it really does. I've seen people go from basic rudimentary art, well, not really, really simple artwork, to doing just amazing stuff, like amazing stylization and characterization and skill, just in a very short period from practicing daily and challenging themselves and doing drawing exercises. It really does work. And anybody can improve through practice. There's no such thing as this, it's an inbuilt talent, or if I wish I could draw, I wish I could do this. It's all about practice. People draw really well because they liked it enough. They, were interested enough to keep on doing it as children, sure. But adults have the same ability to get to a high skill level just by practicing. There's no oh my god, children have no neuroplasticity. They have the natural aptitude. Bullshit. As an adult, you can have that focus and you can improve. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've taught I've taught artwork, drawing. I've, been a student for many years. I've, been in that scene. I know from first hand. Anybody can improve through practice. So yeah, that's a big number one tip. Practice.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's true. Just like you keep at it, right?
Yep.
Keep doing it.
The more time you spend doing it, the better you'll get.
Yeah. I mean, the people who have more inborn talent, it's almost like the tendency would be for them not to work at it and not to do that focused practice, even if it's just a little bit every day. A lot of people rest on that little bit more talent they start off with.
And then they end up producing garbage.
Exactly. It's like the people who keep at it who are going to be doing the good stuff.
Always. So yeah, that's the big first tip. Practice. Okay, my second tip, number 2. But this isn't in reverse order the way those idiots do those lists. It's
well, you're going from least important to most essential.
No. This is most essential to least. This is
okay.
Yeah. Actually, number 1 is practice. Okay, number 2 is life drawing. Now, I put this in because in comics, most comics focus on people. Even the really abstract ones, they focus on like people, or maybe like anthropomorphic animals or something like that. But it's usually based on a kind of, people. And this applies to whether you're doing non-realistic art, or whether you're doing like, Calvin and Hobbes style stylization. Life drawing is so important because it helps you get the weight of a character. It helps you improve their balance, which is the most important thing to making characters look real. If you're drawing from imagination or from photos, you're limited in what you do. Drawing from imagination means that you reproduce the same errors over and over and over, and you really don't see why you're doing it, because you can't, because you're basing it on this like template in your head. So there are big pitfalls with that. The pitfalls with drawing from photos are photos are always flat, and they're from one angle, and they're from one instance in time. They do not give you a realistic view of reality. They give you a snapshot of reality. So again, you're limited in how they can help you. Photos are too flat. They're good for some things, and they're great for like getting a pose right or whatever, but they only help you so much. Life drawing gives you more of an idea of the weight of a pose and the different ways that lighting can affect an image, which is massive. So just a bit of life drawing will give you lessons in that, and you don't have to like go to life drawing classes. Often in cities, you'll be surprised, a lot of people have no idea how many life drawing classes there are in most places, and it's usually like cheap, like maybe $15 or $20, $7 even, to sit in on one. Maybe the people aren't nude, maybe they're dressed, it doesn't matter, as long as you're drawing from life. And if you can't do that, then you can just do quick sketches on a train or in a public place. It's even like a 5-second sketch. That's all it takes. You can like just the stick figure version of a person, because it's the weight of the poses that's important more than drawing accurately. Like, rendering some like a Leonardo da Vinci level of realism. You don't have to do that. As long as you have the weight of poses, that's the most important thing.
So that would be a stick figure, like the way the spine is bent and where the arms are, where the legs are.
Yep. That's it. And
really cool.
That will lend your drawing of whatever style it is, like this indefinable quality that will make it just look so much better. And we all know that Watterson, who did Calvin and Hobbes, he could do like super realistic art. So he knew what he was doing.
Yeah, he was really good. Yeah.
And that informed his stylized work. Okay, so
if you're just copying a cartoon, you're just doing a copy of someone's stylization.
Yeah.
And getting that fundamental kind of grounding. I've heard that before. Like, you can't just copy your favorite comic book artist or cartoonist. Like,
it shows.
Out there, drawing the real thing. Yeah, it shows. Yeah.
A copy of a copy loses quality. Sorry, but it does. So yeah, you've got to go back to the same basics that they went to in order to achieve the same greatness that they achieved.
Right.
All the
That's
time.
Great.
It's like a classical example is the famous fantasy artist Frank Frazetta. Amazing paint, amazing. Possibly one of the best fantasy artists that exist. Now, he learned by going to the art galleries and sketching paintings from the old masters, and doing life drawing and stuff like that. So he looked at their paintings, looked at how they were done, and then tried to understand how they did them. Then we have a protege of his. Well, sort of a protege. It was Boris Vallejo, who came a bit later. Now, his artwork is still, fans like swords and sorcery, a lot of naked figures and stuff like that Frazetta did, but they're very plastic and very stiff and very posed, and they just do not have the same dramatic, romantic feeling that Frazetta's art does. In no way. They're fun, but compared to Frazetta, it's like just cartoony. They're just, not nearly as good, because he was sort of copying the effect that Frank Frazetta had without actually going back to the basics like Frazetta did. So yeah, that's the thing. You're going to go back to the basics. All right. My next tip is simplification. So this is very close to your thing about the streamlining writing down to the basics, because you've got only so much real estate on your page for words. Now, in artwork, you have to simplify your artwork down in order to make it easier to reproduce, because you've got to reproduce this artwork each time, and you want to have it maintaining consistency and all this kind of stuff, and not make it fatigue you by having too much details and stuff like that. So the simplification involves removing unnecessary detail, removing unnecessary internal lines, removing extraneous detail. You can have your fully detailed stuff for your cover pages where your character has everything on them, but when you're drawing your character in the actual comic panels, just simplify it a bit. Don't focus so much on telling, this eye is green and this eye is red, and the character has a bandana around one sleeve, and has this fantastic texture on their leather jacket and all this kind of stuff. You can simplify things down to focus on shapes and important details only. So you don't have to redraw that tattoo on the character's left arm perfectly every single time. That could just be a blur for a lot of it, or just a little squiggle, unless we're on a close-up that actually focuses on that. That's just an example, but simplify things down.
Right.
Even for realistic work, or for stylized cartoony stuff, it applies equally. Simplify, because the important thing is getting the artwork out there rather than spending ages doing it. Like me, who doesn't follow that example at all for my main comic, but I do for Bottomless Waitress. So there you are.
Right.
So you do that for your comic art as well. So you.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of but my covers, when I was doing covers, were no better than the art in the comics. I mean, I don't really have those fundamentals really solidly as an artist, although I'm kind of interested in trying to get them a little better. So I agree, even in a cartoony style, your last point about, getting the weight of a figure, how they stand, how they move, how people hold themselves, all of that keeps your stuff better, even if it's cartoony, and if it's not animated even. It just looks better.
Oh yeah,
pleasing to people, and people buy into it better. That ties into your what's going to be next on your list too. I would like to work on more. Just certain things help people buy into it better. Maybe more detail can be more appealing. This is the only one that I kind of thought oh man, when I see a cover that's so much better than the art on the inside, it's kind of a letdown.
That's that's true. That always pissed me off as a young reader of comics. It pissed me off massively. But that's when you've got that extreme difference between really simplified internal art versus really fantastic covers. And often they would have a specialized cover artist to do those covers, and you have different artists to do the internal artwork.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that is disappointing. It's false advertising, and it's just, I hate it as much as you. So there should not be that much of a disconnect. So,
right. It was the same with some animation. I specifically remember Thundercats when I was a kid. The opening titles animation was so awesome.
Mm.
It got me so excited. I think they did cell shading and stuff like that, and probably more detailed musculature on the characters. And then you get to the show, and there's no cell shading, and it's simplified, and it's just so much less pleasing to the eye. There's so much less texture to it.
Yeah.
I didn't really watch the show, but I always thought the opening looked so awesome. And
Thundercats. Yeah.
I want to watch.
That's a good point. Yeah, you don't want to do simplify it, but don't have too much of a disconnect between what you're showing on the cover and what you're showing internally. So yeah, that's an excellent point. It's just simplify it, but not too much. If you want to have super realistic art on your cover, then you should have fairly close. I mean, your work can be slightly simplified version of that, but don't give us just simple shape, like comic stylized kind of images internally versus that beautiful cover. You've got to be somewhat close. You don't want to have the disconnect being too far.
Right.
Tintin's a great example of a classic comic, or Asterix. There's more detail in those covers. There's more stuff in there, but it's not a different style of artwork from what's inside.
Right. And the old Savage Sword of Conan magazine was awesome. And they would do these painted covers, I don't know if it was different artists doing them. I'm guessing it probably was. But they were very close in style. Then when you open the book and it's black and white, I guess manga is the same a lot of the time, like often or always, right?
Yeah.
But I remember those old Savage Sword, like you'd go and oh, it's black and white. But the black and white stuff inside was just so great. Don Buscema or whatever, and these amazing. It was just great. It was good, black and white, a lot of shadows, or a fair bit, a lot of detail, really, I think, although it was probably simplified. Definitely simpler than the, paintings on the cover.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it worked.
Well, Corto Maltese is another example like that. Really cool watercolor covers. Never color artwork inside. It's always solid black and white, traditional, not even any shading, just solid blacks and whites. Right. But because the internal artwork is so artistically done, it complements that cover artwork.
Right.
And it's simplified because it's just, black and white. And but it's still, even though it is quite different, it doesn't disappoint. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of manga I've read is kind of the same manga, where they'll do a couple of pages sometimes in color.
Yeah.
And when you see those, you're kind of like, oh, geez, it'd be pretty cool if the whole thing was in color. It looks great. But the black and white looks good. They do shading, they do cell shading and tone shading and all that stuff. And the art is good. I mean, you are suggesting, the fundamentals are strong. The backgrounds are good. The anatomy is good.
Yeah. A disappointing example is, say, something like the old Vampirella comics. They're classically disappointing. You look at those amazing covers of Vampirella, and then you look at the internal art and you go, I'm disappointed.
No!
Yeah. Exactly. That was a huge letdown, those comics. For me, anyway.
I don't think I've ever read. I might have read one or two before, but I mean, I know the comics you mean.
Yeah.
There's some awesome covers.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, people being disappointed with that.
Well, next up we have backgrounds. Yay, background. That's my fourth tip. Comics always look better with some kind of backgrounds. It locates your characters in physical space. It locates them in a scene. So it makes everything that happens to them just seem more real and more easy to get involved in, because they're not people floating in space. They're not people just occurring in nowhere. They're occurring in somewhere. So backgrounds are a good thing. But you don't always need, you don't need a realistic background. You don't need a inside of a building, or a battle in the background or stuff like this. You don't need that kind of stuff especially not in every panel. You can have just sketchy lines as a background. You can have scribbles. You can have just a solid color or a gradient or something like this. As long as there is some background somewhere, it sort of it puts your characters in a place. Now they are somewhere. They're against something. So it makes it's just more interesting to a reader to have this. It makes things look better to a reader.
Yeah, it sure does. I mean, it's one thing that's another thing that I've been thinking of lately. When I read this tip of yours, I was like, yes, that's so true. Like, I mean, to try to create something that has the appeal that other things have. Like, I think particularly of anime. Like, I don't watch a ton, but I'm watching more and more as we get more and more, showing up. And one of the things that's so appealing about it is how strong the backgrounds are. Even if the characters are stylized, obviously their faces are very stylized to some degree.
Yeah.
And they look great, and they have cell shading and everything. But a lot of it is like these incredible backgrounds. Even in the shows themselves, like you have these really textured, really kind of sophisticated backgrounds. I don't know how they do it. Teams of artists, I guess, right?
Yeah, they have a separate background artist usually.
Yeah, it's a separate artist or group of artists,
who specializes in architecture and buildings and stuff like this, so they know what they're doing. Or, sometimes it's modeled in 3D and they have people redrawing.
Yeah, well, I mean, that would be my approach for an individual or a smaller group. Like, you move into 3D, so especially if you're going to reuse sets, those spectacular like exterior sets and buildings, like you're saying, and also interiors. Like, I don't know, like having more texture to the world is something I really want to do if I do more serious genres.
Yeah,
you really want people to be immersed, and you want it to be kind of like pleasing to the eye and people to really be into it. So, yeah, background's important.
Very much so.
And you're right, though. It doesn't need to be in every panel. Like, you could set it up, and then you don't have to show it every time. That is a real...
Oh, yeah, but don't make it too detailed either. Like, that's one other part of my tip. I mean, like, if you're going to do like a really detailed background, then make the lines less thick. Use grey instead of black. Have it all just like a washed out color or blurred or something like this. So you're not taking away from the foreground. It's a background, it's not a foreground. So don't have that. Like, if you have a photo as a background, which some people do, that's usually a bad idea because photos are too busy. But if you're going to do that, do something to simplify it. Some people use the filters in order to posterize it to make it more simple, so we don't have colors and shapes. That's a good technique. But yeah, be careful of making your backgrounds too busy, and removing the emphasis from your foreground figures. Right. Well, my last tip is consistency, and I think this is an important final tip, because this really holds everything together. This is the glue that holds comic page art together. You do not have to have really, really fantastic art or a really well-developed style or draw things realistically. That doesn't matter as much as consistency. As long as your characters look the same each time, and your line work is fairly similar each time, use the same kind of colors each time, then readers will adjust to that. It doesn't matter how bad you're drawing it. Well, and your drawing could be fairly bad and still be like I would still feature it, even a comic with bad art, as long as it was consistent, because consistency trumps that. Because consistency equals a style. People aren't looking at your art and going, "Oh my god, that's really crap." They're looking and going, "Oh, that's the style that this person uses," because they do it at the same time each time.
Yeah.
So that makes up so much for skill. It trumps skill. You can have really great skill at drawing, but if your character looks completely different each time, it's going to make it harder for readers to follow it. And they won't develop the same amount of attachment and interest to it if your artwork isn't consistent. So that's why it's such a good tip for artwork in a comic.
Super important, yeah, and very much. I mean, this whole list really, I was kind of wrong in the beginning. Like, this is geared to comic artists.
What do you mean?
Narrative graphics. Well, your list of tips here is actually, it's not just general art. It is geared to like creating a comic, and consistency. Super. Mine's been a little all over the place as I sort of get more comfortable drawing and stuff over the decades. But it's it is important, and as a reader, I definitely notice it. Like, it's comforting to see that same character if you like them. Like, it doesn't have to be brilliantly like photorealistic or brilliantly drawn. It's like that character is that character, and that style is that style, and you get comfortable with it.
Well, I could recognize Oscar anywhere because you have like honed a style for him and a style of look and expression for him. So he's a very recognizable figure. So you can see him.
He has changed over the years a little bit, but and the style changes. Like, sometimes I'm doing this, sometimes I'm doing that.
Yeah,
but that's good to hear. Yeah,
it's a gradual change rather than changing from panel to panel.
Right. Well, yeah, exactly.
Like, I run afoul of this in my early pages in PTA especially, but even later pages, Pinky changes all the time.
Right.
Because I was crap at consistency. So this is another thing that I've noticed in other people's comics as a reader. Consistency does matter a lot. As I read all these tips, well, most of them are things that I will notice from other people's comics and see how well it works, rather than necessarily putting it into practice myself. Simplification, I don't really do that. And consistency, I'm not great at that. But for people that are, wow, it really does make a difference. So try and keep your stuff looking the same. And it won't matter if you think you're not very good at drawing or you're not very good at figures or whatever. It doesn't matter. As long as they look the same, then people will recognize it, and that will be your character. They'll just know it as your character. So, yeah.
I mean, I guess, really, as an artist develops over years, like a lot of these webcomics just run for many, many years. So they'll be a completely different artist now than they were on page one of the comic. That is, 4, 5, 6, 10 years ago or whatever. So that is one thing. So things aren't going to look exactly the same. But the characters will still kind of. I mean, I guess that's a sort of a separate point.
Oh, yeah.
Point. Yeah.
Well, that kind of gradual change is fine, as long as it's the main thing is panel to panel, or just maybe chapter to chapter.
Right.
So yeah, if your comic is completely different because you've been doing it for 10, 15 years or something like that, well, that's people understand that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's sort of what webcomics are.
Yeah,
it's part of the world.
Precisely. Well, so that's our tips. We're over. We've made good time here, so we should wrap it up now.
Yeah. Awesome, man. I think we did mention having writing tips. I don't think we did them, but or did we do them?
We did not do writing tips.
Yeah, I got 5.
Oh, damn it. Well, we've got 10, maybe 7 minutes or something. We could
oh, yeah? You want to go through them?
Yeah, we'll run through them quickly. All right, writing tips.
Yes, writing tips. It's mostly do not do's.
Okay.
As opposed to do's. So my top 5 plus a bonus. This could have been a Patreon extra now that I think about it. Okay, so number 1, avoid too much exposition up front. We talk about this all the time when we talk about webcomic creators, because people want to get the point across and establish the world and everything right on page 1. And so there's so much explanation up front, and people get bored because they have no reason to care. They don't care
Yes.
until it's a character who was trying to do something, and they care about that character who's trying to do something, and there's conflict. So that's when people care. You have to make them care about it first. Then you can do your world building and do more exposition bit by bit as your story goes along.
Yeah, we can't focus on characters, or if you're just telling us about the world.
Exactly. 1,000 years ago. Like, no, you got to cut this out. Cut that part out. Number 2, I said, write things that matter to you. That'd be one of my top things. Like if you're sort of like trying to do something you don't care about because you think it'll be popular or something, or you're trying to fit into something, it's probably not going to be as good as if you're writing about something that you actually care about. And maybe that goes into more thematic things. Maybe it goes into your conflict or your types of characters or whatever. But you have to be your number one fan. Number 3, I said, let different characters be different. They're not all the same, and they're not all you. So.
Oh, this is interesting. Yeah. It's, if you have too much, if you can't tell characters apart, then that starts to be an issue because the readers can't tell them apart. So if you're having characters interacting and talking to each other and doing stuff, then the dramatic tension isn't going to work. Because they won't know who's doing what, or who did what to who.
It's like, all these characters just seem like they're mouthpieces for the author.
Yeah.
In your worst case scenarios. We talked about preachiness too. That ties into my next one, number 4. Powerful stories have themes, but it works better when the theme is somewhat hidden. So not being preachy, not being anvilicious. We've talked about this a few times on the QUACKCAST. Like, even if it's a theme we agree with, it can be very off-putting if it's preachy or beating you over the head with some point that the author is trying to make.
Yeah.
That's not what we read stories and watch stories for.
Yeah, this is like Saturday morning cartoon stuff with we're doing a very special episode.
Right, the moral of this story is...
Yeah, the end thing with the G.I. Joe.
Right.
That's cringeworthy, and it always will be. To everyone. So didactic work is for idiots, okay? Don't do it. Don't be didactic. Unless you're doing a training exercise. Or a chick track.
Right.
This is why training exercises and chick tracks and all that stuff are made fun of, because it's not a good way to do a story. Yeah. So themes are great, but do them cleverly. Get the audience on your side through cleverness. Not saying.
You might even, like, great stuff is often like people will take their own theme out of it. Like you might not necessarily even be able to recognize what the author's theme is. But it's a powerful story, and you feel something from it, even if you interpret the theme to be completely different from what the author was intending. That's not a bad thing.
Yeah. See, you don't necessarily need to have the audience thinking the same way you do.
Exactly, yeah.
As long as your work speaks for itself. Unless your theme is so important to you. And sure.
Right. That can hurt you, though, if you want people to like what you're writing, that.
Yeah.
So watch out for that. I mean, write what you want, but, just be aware.
Just be aware. Yes, exactly.
That's my theme.
Because it's a trap. It's a hard thing. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
I have number 5 and then a bonus. So my number 5 is it applies to me this weekend because I found myself. I got some great. I was happy with what I got done. I got a page done. And then I kept going, and I was just like drawing, and I was going on, and I finally realized that I'm getting exhausted, and this is pointless. So my number 5 was, Oz mentioned practice with writing too. Write as often as possible, drawing, also every day if you can, but working to the point of burnout doesn't help. It can set you back. So like going crazy if you don't have some kind of deadline or something can actually set you back because you burn out, and then the next day or 2 or 3 you don't want to do it, you know?
Yes.
So if it's one or the other, I would say, and this is again advice to myself as much as anybody, like do your thing every day if you can, or as many days as you can, but that's way better than like trying to cram it all into one day or 2 days and just going crazy and making yourself hate what you're doing.
Yes. So yeah, just space it out. Don't burn out like a candle by putting everything into one basket there. So
yeah,
mixing my metaphors here.
Yep. My bonus one, I thought of a number 6, was to jump in and start. Don't be scared. You don't have to be perfect. Your story doesn't have to be perfect. Your artwork doesn't have to be perfect. You know, I was like afraid when I was first thinking of doing a comic for so long. I hesitated. So that's important to think about. Like, just, man, it's okay. You know, jump in and do it. Especially a web comic. You know, stakes are low.
They are low. You learn on the job.
Yeah.
A lot of this stuff just comes to you as you do it. You can only learn through experience. That is incredibly important. I see a member of various webcomic user groups on Facebook where people, all get together and talk about comics and webcomics that they're doing. And you always get these people going, I haven't got my own webcomic, but I'd like to do one. I've been planning this for years, and this is the kind of character. And you think, just, man, what, you've been planning this for years? You could have made 5, 6, 20 different short webcomics in that time and learned all you need to do and produce something amazing by now.
Yeah.
Don't keep plotting and planning about your genius magnum opus that you're going to create, because you're not going to create that ever unless you make a start. Yeah.
Right. And you could start, all these tips from all the ones we've said have so much to them. Like when you dig in, if you have this magnum opus, 10 volumes in mind, start with a short story. Start with a tiny story, start with a 5-pager or a 20-pager, you can jump in and start making something, and that can get yourself working out, in terms of being a comic creator before you go to that bigger stuff. But, yeah, you got to jump in, not spend so many years planning / so many years being scared for whatever reason you're not doing it.
Exactly.
I get this all the time still with starting to write. I'm like, I want to write this or that, comics and other stuff. And then I hesitate and I plan, and time flies by, man.
Exactly. You will never get anywhere unless you begin. So jump in, do it. Ask that out.
Oh, well, you're sure outside of art too. Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Ask that girl out.
Have the confidence to do stuff. Or not even the confidence, and because don't be afraid of failure. That's the problem that people have. They're afraid of failure. But what is failure going to cost you in a lot of these situations? Not a hell of a lot. Especially if you start out small with something, if you don't put too much care and worry into it. What's that?
Writing a webcomic and asking that girl out. You should be even less scary.
Yeah. Well, see how you
got to do both. It applies to both, though. Absolutely, yeah. We'll do it.
All right. Well, this has been a very enlightening thing. I hope these tips help people.
Hope so too, man. Cool.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for that, and bye-bye, listeners.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Talk to you again next week with Serene, hopefully.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.